in the far-flung corners of the galaxy, beyond the great nebulae and clustered star systems, there existed an alliance of alien species so powerful that they had dominated the stars for centuries. The Dominion, as it was called, was a coalition of beings who had mastered every aspect of warfare, from advanced technology to deep strategic insights. Their fleets, vast and seemingly unstoppable, patrolled the galaxy, ensuring that their balance of power remained unchallenged. Yet, for all their power and intellect, the Dominion's generals had begun to notice something that filled them with unease, a growing threat they couldn't fully understand: humanity. This single small battalion of human soldiers had become a thorn in their side. Time and again, the humans, led by a remarkable commander named Colonel Evelyn Drake, had achieved the impossible: victory over alien forces far superior in number and technology. The Dominion had studied their every move, analyzing the tactics, seeking patterns in the human strategies, but they were left puzzled. How could a force so small and so new to the galactic stage be so effective? Every time the Dominion thought they had the humans figured out, the humans would do something unexpected, something they couldn't predict. It was as if the human soldiers were playing an entirely different game, and the Dominion was losing. Colonel Drake, with her sharp mind and unyielding will, was not like any of the Dominion's generals. While the alien commanders calculated, measured, and planned their every move with cold precision, Drake and her battalion thrived on instinct and creativity. Her soldiers didn't rely on the same methods that the Dominion had used for centuries. There was no rigid adherence to doctrine, no predictable steps to follow. Instead, the human battalion adapted to each battle, finding weaknesses in the seemingly invincible enemies they faced. The Dominion's leaders, experts in their fields, could not comprehend how a handful of humans could topple entire fleets with nothing but sheer audacity and clever tactics. It was a concept foreign to the Dominion: unpredictability. They were used to calculating every possibility, foreseeing every move their enemies would make. But humans were different. There was no pattern to their actions. One day, they would charge in full force, guns blazing. The next, they would disappear into the shadows, only to strike when the enemy least expected it. In one battle, they would hold their ground and fight like no one else, and in the next, they would retreat only to come back with a different approach. It was maddening, and it terrified the Dominion's finest minds. As each battle was fought, the reputation of Colonel Drake and her battalion grew. Their victories were scattered across the galaxy like a trail of breadcrumbs that no one could follow. Even when the odds were stacked against them, when all calculations pointed to their defeat, the humans found a way to win. The Dominion began to realize that their old ways of thinking would not work against this unpredictable force. For the first time in generations, the generals of the Dominion were facing something they couldn't calculate, something they couldn't predict, and it unnerved them. The cold, logical minds that had ruled the galaxy were no longer certain of their superiority. Behind closed doors, the Dominion's top strategists gathered in secret. They spoke of the humans, their growing power, and the fear that was slowly creeping into their hearts. It wasn't just about the humans' victories anymore. It was about what their success represented. The Dominion, who had always prided themselves on their intelligence, could no longer claim to be the smartest or the most capable. Humanity had cracked open a door they had thought was sealed tight. There was something about humans that made them unpredictable, something beyond tactics or weapons, something the Dominion couldn't put their fingers on. The generals feared that this unpredictability would be the thing that could bring their entire empire down. And so, the generals began to plot. They couldn't simply wipe out the humans. No, that would be too easy. They had to figure out how to break their spirit, how to destroy what made them so dangerous. But no matter how they planned, no matter how they schemed, they kept running into the same problem. The humans could never be fully anticipated. They were a wild card, a factor that no amount of intelligence or technology could control. The Dominion's greatest minds were no longer sure if victory was even possible. against an enemy who fought by their own rules, a force that defied logic, strategy, and even the galaxy's most advanced calculations. The one thing the Dominion's generals were certain of was this: humans had changed the game forever. The galaxy, once so predictable and controlled by the Dominion, was beginning to shift. And deep in the heart of the Dominion, there was one question everyone was asking. How long could they maintain their dominance if they couldn't even understand what made humanity so dangerous? The fear was real. The fear was growing, and the unknown was becoming the most terrifying force in the galaxy. The human battalion had never shied away from the impossible, but their new mission was unlike any they had faced before. Vexar Station, a vital outpost located on the fringe of Dominion-controlled space, was under the control of the Arcanid, an alien species renowned for their technological superiority and near-perfect military discipline. The Dominion's generals believed this mission to be nothing short of suicide for anyone who dared attempt it, especially a battalion as small as Colonel Evelyn Drake's. The station's defenses were formidable, its arsenal vast, and its tactical routines flawless. In the eyes of the Dominion, the Arcanid were the epitome of war: precise, efficient, and deadly. The odds were heavily stacked against the humans. If any other species had been given the task, they would have been wiped out before even getting close. But Colonel Drake had never been one to accept what others believed was impossible. Drake's battalion, despite lacking the advanced technologies that the Arcanid boasted, possessed something far more valuable: resolve. Where the Arcanid relied on calculations, patterns, and predictability, the humans thrived on the unknown. They didn't need to follow the rules. They would make their own. The mission's outcome seemed grim, but there was no room for hesitation. Colonel Drake's voice was calm as she addressed her troops. "We don't fight like them. We will not follow their game. We will change the game." Her words, simple yet profound, ignited a fire in the hearts of her soldiers. They were not bound by the rigidity of conventional warfare. They would make their own rules. The plan they devised was as unexpected as it was brilliant. Instead of assaulting the station head-on with brute force, Drake ordered an unorthodox strategy: chaos. The Arcanid, highly trained and disciplined, thrived on routine. They had come to expect certain patterns in any attack, and this predictability was their strength. It was also their greatest weakness. The humans would not follow the expected playbook. They would turn it upside down. The first phase of the attack began with a series of feigned surrenders. The battalion, equipped with nothing more than their standard gear, deployed small squads to approach the station under the cover of weak, unorganized fire. To the Arcanid, this looked like a desperate attempt at negotiation, a surrender from a force that clearly couldn't hope to defeat them. They saw no reason to respond with caution. The Arcanid commanders, confident in their technological superiority, called for a ceasefire, certain that the humans were about to fold under pressure. But this was exactly what the humans wanted. Once they had lured the Arcanid into a false sense of security, the next phase of the plan unfolded. In the dead of night, the battalion pulled off a masterstroke, a strategic withdrawal, pulling their forces back from the station. From the outside, it looked like a complete retreat. The Arcanid, eager to press their advantage, began to push forward. But in doing so, they fell into a trap. The humans had scattered behind enemy lines, using the Arcanid's own overconfidence against them. Small, rapid attacks began to spring up in all directions. There was no central point of focus for the Arcanid to strike back at, no visible command structure to dismantle. The Arcanid were forced to react to 1,000 different threats at once, each more confusing than the last. In the midst of the chaos, Colonel Drake's forces executed a series of devastating guerrilla tactics. One by one, key points of the station's defenses were neutralized, not with direct confrontations, but by exploiting the smallest weaknesses in the Arcanid's routines. Communication lines were severed, sensors were disabled, and the once unified front began to crumble. The Arcanid, unable to adapt quickly enough to the shifting tactics of the humans, began to panic. Their once impenetrable station was slowly turning into a chaotic battlefield, with no clear victor in sight. Days passed, and the relentless human assault continued to destabilize the Arcanid forces. The command center of Vexar Station, once a symbol of the Arcanids' unmatched military prowess, was now overrun with confusion and disarray. Finally, the Arcanid were left with no choice but to retreat, abandoning the station entirely. The once untouchable outpost had fallen, not through sheer firepower, but through the relentless, unpredictable nature of the human attack. News of this unexpected victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Dominion, already fearful of humanity's ingenuity, now understood the full scope of the threat they posed. It wasn't just that the humans had won, it was how they had won. The Arcanid, the most disciplined species in the galaxy, had been undone not by a superior military force, but by a single trait that the humans had honed to perfection: creativity. The Dominion's generals, who had believed themselves to be the masters of war, now realized that they had underestimated the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed, a weapon that no amount of advanced technology or calculated strategies could ever predict. The Battalion's victory at Vexar Station was a clear message. The humans had arrived, and they would never be predictable again. The human victory at Vexar Station had rippled across the galaxy, its effects sending shockwaves through the ranks of the Dominion. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's generals found themselves facing an enemy they could neither predict nor easily defeat. With every passing day, the humans' reputation grew, and the once confident leaders of the Dominion began to feel a creeping fear. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and think outside the rigid strategies they themselves had relied on for so long. To wipe out the human threat once and for all, the Dominion decided on a course of action: a war of attrition. They would crush the human battalion under the weight of overwhelming numbers, superior technology, and relentless firepower. The plan was simple: surround the humans, starve them, and grind them down, one engagement at a time. But Colonel Evelyn Drake was no stranger to adversity. As the Dominion's forces gathered, preparing to unleash their might, Drake knew the battle was not one they could win through sheer force. Outnumbered and outgunned, the humans had no choice but to fight the Dominion's forces in a way they never expected. Instead of holding a single front or making a stand in one location, Drake split her forces into smaller, more agile units, dispersing them across the galaxy. She understood that in a war of attrition, the key was not to fight directly, but to make the enemy fight on your terms. The Dominion's generals believed that the scattered human forces would be easy to isolate and destroy, but Drake's tactics were anything but predictable. Her battalion moved with the stealth of shadows, striking quickly at weak points in the Dominion's vast supply lines. They attacked isolated outposts, ambushed convoy transports, and sabotaged critical infrastructure. Each attack was like a ghost haunting the Dominion, sowing confusion and creating disarray among their forces. Whenever the Dominion thought they had trapped the humans in one location, the battalion vanished, only to reappear at a completely different part of the galaxy. The Dominion's fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, began to show signs of strain. Their soldiers were exhausted, their resources dwindling, and their fleets stretched too thin. The humans' hit-and-run tactics kept them off balance, always one step ahead, always slipping through the cracks. It became clear that the Dominion generals were struggling to anticipate the next move. The humans were not fighting the way the Dominion expected them to. They had no fixed pattern. They didn't follow traditional battle plans or honor the laws of warfare that had been etched into the very bones of Dominion's strategy. The humans fought by intuition, exploiting weaknesses with surgical precision. The Dominion generals could calculate the number of soldiers, the power of their weapons, but they could not calculate unpredictability. What the Dominion had initially thought of as a simple war of attrition turned into a battle of wits. Each skirmish, each attack, was not about brute strength. It was a mental game, and the humans seemed to be playing it better. The Dominion's leaders, with all their advanced technology and battle-hardened experience, were struggling to adapt. The humans didn't give them time to think, time to plan their next move. They kept the Dominion constantly reacting, always behind. It was the perfect strategy for a smaller force, one that didn't have the luxury of overwhelming numbers but had something far more dangerous: creativity. As the war raged on, the Dominion's confidence began to crack. The more they tried to push the humans into a corner, the more they realized they were fighting an enemy who refused to be cornered. Colonel Drake's battalion had turned the war into a battle of attrition of the mind, where each victory, no matter how small, added to the growing legend of humanity's ability to defy expectations. The Dominion's vast fleets, designed to crush and conquer, now found themselves at the mercy of tactics they couldn't predict. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans would slip away, leaving only frustration in their wake. The real fear began to set in among the Dominion's highest commanders. It wasn't that the humans were winning battle after battle. It was that they had made unpredictability their greatest weapon. As the humans continued to outthink their opponents, the Dominion generals were forced to confront the undeniable truth. They could not win by simply throwing more soldiers into the fray. The war of attrition was becoming a test of endurance, not just of resources, but of strategy. And in this battle of minds, humanity was starting to look like the true victor. With every unexpected move, every unanticipated victory, the humans were rewriting the rules of warfare. The Dominion could not keep up. What started as a simple strategy to destroy humanity was now becoming a desperate struggle for control, one that the humans seemed to be winning with each passing day. The question that lingered in the minds of the Dominion's generals was no longer if they would win, but how long could they keep fighting before they were outsmarted entirely. After months of relentless skirmishes, the Dominion's once unshakable forces began to show signs of weakness. Their fleets, once mighty and invincible, were now diminished and battered. Supplies were running low, and the once certain victories were becoming fewer and farther between. The Dominion's generals, accustomed to flawless tactics and predictable outcomes, found themselves caught in a never-ending cycle of countermeasures and failed strategies. The humans, despite their smaller numbers and lack of advanced technology, had become an unrelenting force, one that no amount of firepower could easily crush. The more the Dominion fought, the more they realized that no matter what they did, the humans always seemed to be one step ahead. In the deepest chambers of the Dominion's war council, the generals gathered, frustration evident in their eyes. For the first time in their long history, they were facing an enemy that couldn't be predicted, outwitted, or easily defeated. They had calculated every possibility, exhausted every strategy, and yet the humans were still standing. The generals knew that their situation had become desperate, and so, in their desperation, they conceived a bold, final plan, one that they hoped would break humanity once and for all. The solution was simple: strike at the heart of the humans' homeworld, Earth. With overwhelming force, they would obliterate the source of the problem, annihilating humanity before they could rise any further. It was a decisive assault, one meant to crush any hope the humans had left of winning the war. The Dominion's fleets, now fully mobilized, descended upon Earth with unrelenting fury. Their ships filled the skies, their weapons primed and ready. The humans, scattered across the galaxy, had no idea what was coming. Or so the Dominion thought. As the first wave of the Dominion's ships entered Earth's atmosphere, ready to begin their assault, something unexpected happened. The scattered human forces, Colonel Drake's battalion, began to return, converging from all corners of the galaxy. For months, they had been laying the groundwork for this very moment, biding their time, waiting for the right opportunity. The Dominion had assumed that they were dealing with a fragmented force, unable to coordinate or mount a true counterattack. But they were wrong. Under Colonel Drake's command, the once divided battalion reunited in full force. The soldiers, hardened by countless battles, were now more resourceful, more experienced, and more determined than ever. Their scattered forces, now united, formed a cohesive and deadly unit. They were ready. The humans had spent months studying the Dominion's weaknesses, observing every flaw and vulnerability in their strategies. And now, as the Dominion's fleets arrived above Earth, the humans struck with precision and speed. In a series of lightning-fast strikes, the humans began to dismantle the Dominion's forces. Using their vast knowledge of Dominion tactics, Colonel Drake's forces targeted weak points in the Dominion's ships and defenses. They struck the engines, crippling the fleet's mobility. They sabotaged communication systems, leaving the Dominion's commanders unable to coordinate. Their attacks were calculated, exploiting every flaw they had noticed in previous engagements. The Dominion's once overwhelming superiority quickly became its greatest disadvantage. The human forces were quick, agile, and precise, qualities that the Dominion could not anticipate or counter. As the Dominion's ships were systematically destroyed, the generals found themselves stunned. They had never expected this. A single, human battalion, scattered across the galaxy, now reunited to launch an all-out counter-offensive. The precision, the speed, the intelligence. It was unlike anything they had ever faced. The Dominion had assumed that their overwhelming firepower would be enough to crush the humans, but they had miscalculated. Humans didn't need to be stronger to win. They just needed to outthink their opponents. The Dominion's greatest asset, their supposed mastery of strategy, was rendered useless against the humans' adaptability. As the last of the Dominion's fleets were destroyed, the generals were forced to confront the undeniable truth. They had been outsmarted. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had turned the tide of war, not through brute strength, but through sheer intelligence and determination. The war that had once seemed like a certain victory for the Dominion had now become a devastating defeat. The humans had shown that they didn't need to fight on the Dominion's terms. They could make their own rules. And as Colonel Drake's forces celebrated their victory, it was clear that the Dominion's reign was coming to an end. The battle for Earth had been the turning point. The humans had not only survived, they had triumphed. And now, the galaxy would have to reckon with the full force of humanity's most powerful weapon, their mind. The retreat of the Dominion's fleet was a bitter pill for the once proud empire to swallow. Earth, against all odds, stood intact, its skies free from the shadow of destruction. It was a symbol, not just of humanity's survival, but of their defiance, their ingenuity, and above all, their unpredictability. The Dominion's most powerful ships, their most seasoned warriors, had been outmaneuvered by a single human battalion. A force they had once considered nothing more than a minor nuisance. Now, they were forced to confront the undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer something to be dismissed. They were a growing threat that no one in the galaxy could afford to ignore. In the aftermath of the retreat, the generals of the Dominion convened once again in their grand war chambers. The once confident figures sat in silence, their faces lined with the worry of leaders who had been proven wrong in the most devastating of ways. They had believed that sheer numbers, overwhelming firepower, and centuries of battle-hardened strategy would be enough to quash the humans, but they had been wrong. The human battalion had not fought on their terms. They had fought their own way, using tactics that defied logic and shattered expectations. No matter how much the Dominion tried to predict their next move, they couldn't, and that was what terrified them most. While the Dominion's empire remained in power, their sense of invincibility had been broken. The humans had exposed a vulnerability that no one had anticipated. They could not be predicted. The humans' unpredictability had turned them into an uncontainable force. For the first time in a long while, the Dominion's leaders found themselves questioning their own superiority. The Empire's generals, once hailed as the smartest minds in the galaxy, were now left with a chilling realization. The humans were not just a nuisance anymore. They were a threat, one that could one day bring the entire Dominion Empire to its knees. As the years passed, the legend of Colonel Evelyn Drake's battalion only grew. The once modest human force became a symbol of resilience and brilliance, their victories whispered about in every corner of the galaxy. Each new engagement, each unexpected victory, added to the growing mythos of humanity's ability to turn the tide of any conflict, no matter how impossible. From the most elite war rooms of the Dominion to the darkest corners of the galaxy, the humans' tactics were studied, analyzed, and feared. And yet, no one could figure out the secret to their success. How could a small group of humans, without the advanced technology of the Dominion or the sheer numbers of other empires, consistently outsmart the most formidable military minds in existence? The question echoed across the stars. Why do the smartest generals in the galaxy fear a single human battalion? The answer, though elusive, was clear. It wasn't the human strength, it wasn't their firepower or their numbers, it was their unpredictability. The humans didn't follow the rules, they didn't fight the way others expected them to. They adapted, evolved, and outthought their enemies at every turn. In the world of warfare, where strategy and calculation ruled, the humans had learned to exploit the most dangerous weapon of all, the ability to think beyond the expected. And that weapon, the Dominion knew, was not something they could defeat with sheer force. It wasn't something that could be predicted or controlled. In fact, it was the one thing that terrified them most. They had learned through bitter experience that the human mind could not be anticipated. It was a wild card in a game where every move mattered. And in the galaxy's grand game of power, the human mind was the greatest threat to all. As the years went on, whispers continued to spread throughout the galaxy. The once dominant powers of the Dominion were forced to reconsider their own strategies. No longer could they view humanity as just a minor inconvenience. They had to acknowledge that the human battalion, small, resourceful, and unpredictable, was the greatest challenge the galaxy had ever faced. The battle for supremacy in the galaxy was no longer just about strength. It was about the ability to outthink your enemy, and in that realm, humanity had already proven that they could not be beaten. The fear that had settled in the Dominion generals' hearts never truly faded. It simmered beneath the surface, growing as humanity continued to prove that, in the unpredictable nature of war, they were the masters. As the galaxy moved forward, one question lingered in the minds of all those who had once believed in the unshakable power of the Dominion. What would happen when humanity finally decided it was time to take control?